Dear students, we have discussed the presumption about the validity of statutes, and we have seen how the validity of a statute, this presumption about the validity of a statute, is sustained by the court by resorting to different techniques. One of the techniques that I discussed in the last video was uh, to sever certain parts of the provision which are invalid, and if it is possible, then hold the rest of the provision to be constitutionally valid. But then there can be circumstances, there can be situations whereby the severance may not be possible. However, uh, uh, however, uh, it is also not desirable to hold the entire legislation to be unconstitutional. Certain parts of it are to be, if they are to be narrowed down, if their application can be restricted, then the presumption about the validity can be sustained. So, in order to sustain the presumption about the validity, in addition to the doctrine of severability, sometimes what is known as the device or technique of reading down a provision is resorted by the court. And reading down of a provision or part of a statute is resorted to by the court only where the doctrine of severability cannot be applied. Of course, we have seen that how RMDC versus Union of India, different situations and circumstances where the statute either has to be held as a whole invalid, or it can be held in part invalid, and the other part of it which is which can be saved is to be saved. So I have discussed that part with reference to leading cases in the previous video. Today I want to focus on reading down and certain other techniques and devices which are resorted to by the courts in order to sustain the presumption of validity of the constitution. So reading down has to be done after the court has gone through the literal reading of the legislation, and if on such reading and understanding the vice of unconstitutionality is attracted, the vice of unconstitutionality is attracted, and the provision is designed in such a manner that it is not possible to resort to the doctrine of severability, then the court must explore whether there has been an unintended legislative omission, or if such an intendment can be reasonably implied without undertaking what unmistakably would be a legislative exercise. The act may be, the certain parts of the act may be read down, so it's in order to save it from unconstitutionality. So reading down of a provision, a section or part of section, sometimes is resorted to by the court as a technique to sustain the presumption of validity, particularly in cases where the doctrine of severability cannot be applied. One of the most popular cases in recent times about the application of the doctrine of this technique of reading down was resorted to by the court in Avtesh Singh Johar case, where section 377 of the Indian Penal Code was read down, and the reading down of this section was done, had to be done, because there was no way that part of the section could be held unconstitutional and part could be saved. It was designed in such a manner, it has been drafted, section 377 IPC has been drafted in such a manner that either that the doctrine of severability could not be applied. But the court wanted to sustain the presumption of the validity of the provision. Therefore, it tried to read it down. It actually, in fact, by majority opinion, a very celebrated judgment of Avtesh Singh Johar, where it read down. It read down to mean that the consensual sex between adults, people who are 18 plus of age, this section 377 would not apply to all those persons. They may be male, female, homosexual, heterosexual, whatever the gender, popularly known as LGBTQ. As far as consensual sex is concerned, in whatever form, section 377 cannot apply. So section 377 is unconstitutional to the extent it tried to apply, it was applied on a consensual sexual act between LGBTQI or even people of male and female genders. But the technique of reading down was used, and it was held that as far as the as section 377 tried to criminalize consensual voluntary sex between adults, between people who are above the age of 18, to that extent the section is violative of article 14, 15, 16, 19, 21, and therefore it has to be read down. In those situations, section 377 cannot be applied. So this is an example where technique of reading down has been adopted, but then technique of reading down cannot be resorted to in every case where there is question marks about the validity of the statute. For instance, in a recent case in Dr. Subramaniam Swamy versus Raju in 2014, there was a question about the interpretation of Juvenile Justice Act, and the issue was whether certain parts of Juvenile Justice Act should be read down to mean that some children below the age of 18 who are intellectually, emotionally and mentally mature enough to understand the implications of their acts and who have committed serious heinous crimes do not come under the purview of that. We know that Juvenile Justice Act 2006 saves children below the age of 18 from the normal criminal procedure and the normal substantive law which is applied to adults when they commit a crime. So an attempt was made, a suggestion was made in Dr. Subramaniam Swamy versus Raju to read down those parts of the Juvenile Justice Act whereby children below the age of 18 were completely taken away from the general principle of application of the principles of criminal justice system, CRPC, IPC, etc., and they were placed under Juvenile Justice Act. Supreme Court analyzed and went through the provisions of reading down, but held that in the present case we have to first do the literal reading, and if we do the literal reading, there is no difficulty in understanding the clear and unambiguous meaning of the different provisions of the Act. So there is no ambiguity as far as the age of the children who are to be covered under Juvenile Justice Act. There is no uncertainty in the language to convey what the legislature had intended. Therefore, all persons below the age of 18 are to be put in one class by the Act to provide a separate scheme of investigation, trial and punishment for offences committed by them. So a class of person is sought to be created who are treated differently, and then the court went on to discuss that the basis of classification is rational, there is an intelligible differentia, and there is also a rational nexus with the object which is sought to be achieved. So the Supreme Court in this case went on to hold that the although there are question marks about the constitutional validity of those parts were raised, but when the court resorted to the literal reading of the Act itself, the meaning became very clear. It was unambiguous without any uncertainty. So in a situation like this, the court decided that we cannot go ahead and apply the technique of reading down and hold that the section means something completely different from what it expressly and very clearly, very categorically lays down in the Juvenile Justice Act. So we see that even the technique of reading down depends upon the outlook of the court, upon the nature of the case, upon the language of the provision which is under question mark, whose constitutional validity is suspect or is questioned. Another technique of saving the presumption of validity of a statute is read into, whereby a provision is read into which is not expressly there in the section or in the statute. Something can be read into it in order to save the constitutional validity of the statute. This is also a technique of supplying meaning, where it appears that the provision or the part of a statute or even constitutional law, there appears to be some silence, some gap, etc. So in those cases the court can go on to read into something which is not expressly there in the language of the statute, in the language of the provision. Some of the most famous instances of application of read into is, we know, you are very aware, the interpretation of the Supreme Court of Article 124 of the Constitution, whereby the provision for the appointment of judges of Supreme Court and High Court is made, and how the Supreme Court read into Article 124 the entire collegium system. And there have been number of cases, first judge's case, second judge's case, third judge's case, and finally the fourth judge's case in 2014, whereby the Supreme Court authoritatively repelled every challenge to the collegium system of appointment of judges of High Courts and Supreme Court. So you see, in Supreme Court read into Article 124 a collegium system which was not there. I mean, if you look at the text of it, even the word is missing. Nothing can be implied as far as the text is concerned, but the court went on to read into Article 124 a collegium system on the ground that independence of judiciary is part of the basic structure of the Constitution, and in order to safeguard independence of judiciary, it is necessary to have an independent system of appointment, which is now known as collegium system. I don't want to discuss that case in detail because you are already very aware, and this case is very this instance of reading into a provision of the Constitution is very, very popular. Another example we can discuss about the reading into technique of read into is the interpretation of Article 368, whereby implied limitation on the power of the Parliament to amend the Constitution has been read into Article 368. And in famous case of Keshwanand Bharati versus State of Kerala, we know that doctrine of basic structure imposes a limitation now on the, and doctrine of basic structure is not to be found in any part of the Constitution or under Article 368 or under any other provision of the Constitution, but this doctrine of basic structure was read into under Article 368 as an implied limitation. However, it does not mean that in every case where a suggestion of read into is made, the court will accept and go on to read into something which is not there. There are many cases whereby the courts have refused to read into something which is not there in the express language of the provision. In recent times, in Manoj Narula versus Union of India in 2014, a case came up before the Supreme Court whereby suggestion was made that Article 75 Clause 1 should be read in such a manner so as to mean that the Prime Minister, while giving advice to the President for appointment of a person as a minister, cannot recommend a name of a person who has crossed the stage of criminal trial, who is facing a criminal trial and has crossed the stage of framing of charges. So if against a person criminal charges have been framed and that stage has been crossed, then the Prime Minister under Article 75 Clause 1 does not have the power to recommend the name of that person to the President for appointment as minister. So this suggestion was made in Manoj Narula versus Union of India, and the argument was also made with reference to Representation of People Act 1951, even under Representation of People Act 1951 there are certain disqualifications which are prescribed. However, the court went through several other arguments were also made in order to read into Article 75 Clause 1 the kind of effect that I just discussed. Supreme Court examined all the arguments and the counter arguments which were given in Manoj Narula case about reading into that limitation on the power of the Prime Minister to recommend a person's name to be appointed as a minister who has crossed the stage of framing of criminal charges. Supreme Court held that no, the that when there is no disqualification for a person against whom charge have been framed in respect of even if in respect of heinous or serious offences relating to corruption to contest the election, we by interpretative process we cannot I mean it is very difficult for us to read the prohibition into article 75 clause 1 or for that matter the corresponding section corresponding article 164 clause 1, and the Supreme Court held that it would come within the criteria of eligibility, something which has been prescribed by the Representation of People Act. So something and also by the Constitution itself, who is eligible to become the minister, who is eligible or not eligible to become the member of the parliament, member of the legislature. Those are already very well laid down very clearly, very expressly in the Constitution and People's Representation Act, Representation of People Act 1951 and the Constitution, and therefore in the absence of any constitutional prohibition or in the absence of statutory embargo about disqualification to that effect, Supreme Court held that it cannot be read into Article 75(1) or Article 164 Clause 1. So we see that even though the technique of reading down or reading into is available with the Supreme Court, it is not that in each and every case the Supreme Court will go on to apply the doctrine of the technique of reading into or reading down. It depends upon the discretion of the court, it depends upon the facts and circumstances of each case, it depends upon the language in which the provision has been drafted, it depends upon the relevant provisions of the Constitution which are applicable to that statute. So number of factors are to be taken into account. But mind you, I have already discussed at length and this possibility, this issue of the subjective ideology of the judge, his personal understanding of the matter, his opinion before the matter comes for decision before him, that plays a role. And he has got, you see, so many of options available to himself, so many choices, so many techniques and devices to choose from, that a judge is really who is doing the interpretative exercise is very, very powerful in that sense, and he holds great amount of influence while deciding particular cases. So another important aspect of presumption, another important presumption which I would like to briefly discuss is the presumption about the prospectivity of statutes, that every statute is presumed to have prospective effect. In fact, we know that as far as criminal statutes, criminal legislations are concerned, they can never be retrospective. There is constitutional prohibition against criminalization of an act which is not a crime on the day it has been committed, to make it a crime from back date. So there is prohibition of ex post facto against giving retrospective effect to criminal legislation. But when it comes to civil legislation, civil statutes, civil liabilities, there is number one, presumption about their prospective application, but then there are circumstances in which they can be given retrospective effect also. So if the presumption is rebutted adequately, sufficiently in the opinion of the court, then the court can also give retrospective effect. The parliament, legislature, competent legislature can also very expressly give retrospective effect to civil laws, civil statutes and civil provision. In recent case, the matter came before the Supreme Court in Dr. Suhas H. Pophale versus Oriental Insurance Company Limited in 2014, and here one of the issues was, can the Public Premises Eviction of Unauthorized Occupants Act 1971 be given retrospective effect? While deciding this issue of retrospective application of the impugned legislation, of the concerned legislation, Supreme Court went on to recall the law about the retrospective and prospective application of legislation of statutes. And Supreme Court began by quoting Janardhan Reddy versus the state, whereby the Supreme Court had held way back in 1951 that if there are rights created in favor of any person, whether they are property rights or rights arising from a transaction in the nature of a contract, and particularly if they are protected under a statute, and if they are to be taken away by any legislation, that legislation will have to do so specifically by giving it a retrospective effect. And prima facie, every legislation is presumed to be prospective. So, if these are some circumstances are like this, then the court will have to find out in the statute itself whether there is a specific instruction, a specific provision which makes the legislation applicable from the back date. The Supreme Court referred to another constitutional bench judgment of 1957 in Garkiyapati Virappa Garkiyapati Viraya versus N. Subaiya Chaudhary, whereby Supreme Court has held that in the absence of in the enactment to show that it is to be retrospective, it cannot be so constructed as to have the effect of altering the law applicable to a claim in litigation at the time when the act was passed. And the third judgment, constitutional bench judgment again, which the Supreme Court referred, was a judgment in Amireddy Raja Gopala Rao versus Amireddy Sitharamma, a decision given by the constitutional bench in 1965, where the court held that a statute has to be interpreted, if possible, so as to respect vested rights. And this is the core of the matter. When a statute has been in application for some time and some transaction has taken place, certain vested rights, duties and obligations might accrue, and if there is a new legislation on the same subject matter and it tries to have retrospective effect, then complication about the vested rights arise. So in this judgment, Supreme Court held that a statute has to be interpreted, if possible, so as to respect vested rights, and if the words are open to another construction, such a construction should not be adopted. So you see, another three judges bench of Supreme Court had decided in in JP Jani income tax officer circle versus Indru Prasad Dev Shankar Bhatt. Supreme Court held that the principle of interpretation provides about the presumption about the interpretation of statute is about the prospective application, and unless the terms of the statute expressly so provide, there is a necessary implication retrospective operation should not be given to the statute so as to affect, alter or destroy any right already acquired, or to revive any remedy already lost by efflux of time. So now we know that presumption of prospective application of a statute is important, and it is very frequently upheld by the court, but the legislature, competent legislature or the parliament can give retrospective application also, and when retrospective application of legislation is made, then it has to be done expressly in the provision, with the provision of the statute itself, and not to be read into the statute very lightly. Retrospectivity of a legislation should not be very lightly read into a statute. Another important provision about the interpretation of statute is that every statute is presumed to have territorial nexus. And territorial application, territorial jurisdiction. So the competent legislature which has enacted the law is presumed to have intended to apply that law within the territory over which it has got territorial jurisdiction. We know that under Article 245 of the Indian Constitution, the legislature of a state has been empowered to make laws for the whole or any part of the state, and the parliament has been empowered to make law for the whole or any part of the territory of India. So at the first instance, that there is a presumption that there will be territorial nexus that the parliament or the legislature, if they have enacted a statute, they have jurisdiction, they have jurisdiction, they have power to apply that statute within the territory. However, there can be circumstances whereby the statute may have extraterritorial application also. In fact, as far as the parliament is concerned, Article 245 clause 2 expressly provides that no law made by parliament shall be deemed to be invalid on the ground that it would have extraterritorial operation. So in that sense, we see that as far as parliament is concerned, it can enact legislation which will have extraterritorial application. We can discuss a few circumstances where this problem or these issues arise. One case is that an Indian citizen has gone outside and has committed some crime, or maybe he was subject to Indian laws made by the Indian Parliament or Indian legislature and is outside of India. In that situation, of course, he is going to be governed by Indian laws, and it will be an instance of extraterritorial application of a statute, which would rebut the presumption that every statute is presumed to be within the to apply within the territory over which the concerned competent legislature has the jurisdiction. Another situation is where there is a foreigner who is coming to a particular country or state or territory. Then the law of that territory will apply. Of course, that is an example of law applying within the territory over which the legislature had jurisdiction. But more frequent disputes about the territorial or extraterritorial application of a statute, and this presumption about the territoriality of statutes arises with respect to states. So, say a state of Maharashtra has made one law, and some transaction has taken place which involves also state of say Tamil Nadu. Now, whether the statute passed by the state of Maharashtra would apply to that transaction which may have been concluded in the state of Tamil Nadu, or maybe people from state of Tamil Nadu or companies, organization from state of Tamil Nadu are involved and the transaction has completed in the state of Maharashtra. Then you can say that this is a case where the presumption about the territoriality of statutes will come under question mark. So this is and also the imposition of sale tax and income tax, whereby this issue of territoriality becomes very important and the courts have to interpret them. I have already discussed a leading case of Popat Lal Shah versus the state of Madras, 1953, AIR 274, with reference to title and preamble, use of title and preamble as an aid to interpretation, whereby the facts were that in state of Madras, certain firm was doing some activities, selling kirana articles and purchasing things and selling objects of general use, and it had some transaction with another company which was based in Calcutta, and then some transactions concluded and the state of Madras tried to impose tax on those transactions. It was held that the state of Madras does not have territorial sale tax of Madras does not have territorial jurisdiction over a transaction which has completed in Calcutta. Finally, the court, with reference to title and preamble, held that the tax would not apply, going by the facts and circumstances of the case. So you can refer to that case. I have supplied to you that case also. So this is the area whereby the question of territoriality of statute arises most, and sometimes it is accepted, sometimes it is rebutted successfully, and sometimes the presumption is sustained. So these are the issues which we need to focus on when it comes to interpretation of statutes. We must always keep in mind that judges have great deal of leverage when it comes to applying different rules, different principles, different canons of interpretation, and a great deal of it depends upon the peculiar circumstances of the case, facts of the case, language of the statute, language of the provision which is under consideration, which is under question for interpretation, and but also the larger problem of meaning making of judges themselves, meaning of their life, meaning of their existence, and then specific issues whereby they have their specific opinions, they have ideological preferences, they have their affiliation with social classes, they come from particular social class, they come from particular gender, some identity, and their identification with the particular identities, their individual uh, their individual preference about how the life is to be conceived, how life in general is to be governed and is to be made meaningful. Those are the factors which ultimately come to play a role, and these rules of interpretation, canons of interpretation, aids of interpretation, presumptions as to interpretation of statute, they basically become available tools in the hand of judges to build their reasoning in the legal language. So as far as decision making is concerned, specific decision making may have been influenced by factors which are social, political, economic, cultural, ideological, and many more, whatnot. But when it comes to writing of the judgments, these rules of interpretation are invoked by the judges uh, depending upon their subjective satisfaction, individual preferences, group preferences, and finally a problem of interpretation is resolved. Therefore, every student of law must master all these rules and techniques of interpretation, methods of interpretation, but at the same time should also remain aware and alive that the larger problem of construction of meaning and this problem of every meaning being contingent and temporary, the possibility of every word being differently interpreted to mean something different at different times and under different circumstances, that possibility is the real problem of interpretation, rather than just the reference to rules, regulations, aids, or presumptions to interpretation of statute. I hope that this subject has been as interesting as possible, and it has been able to open up your mind as to the complexities involved in the judicial process of interpretation, and you will take more interest in the subject, read more about it, and go on to become a master of the subject of interpretation and judicial process. Thank you very much. I will supply the material for you to study more and to secure better marks. Wish you all the best. Thank you.